move people around as well as necessary. I want to respect the time of the people who have gathered.
I agree. Okay.
And Mackenzie just logged in, so I will be giving her permission.
Okay.
Go ahead, Susan.
Go ahead. Good
If
evening.
you're good to go, we're good to go.
Good to go. Okay. Good evening. Prior to beginning tonight's events, I wish to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and the Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Susan Parkinson, and Director of the Library of Services at the Calmar Public Library. On behalf of Robina Baker School Council and the Calmar Public Library, I wish to welcome everyone for attending this evening's forum. We have a busy evening ahead of us, so without any further ado, we will get down to business. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, Mr. Ian McCormick. Mr. McCormick, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Susan, and welcome to everybody who is participating in this forum this evening. Welcome to our 3 candidates here, and welcome to all of those of you who are interested enough in the electoral process and in the Black Gold School District that you are joining us here as well. My name is Ian McCormick. I am pleased to be the moderator for tonight's session. We are running tonight from now for about the next hour or so. I run a company called Strategic Steps. We do a lot of local government consulting around Western Canada, a little bit into the north and a little bit into the States. So we're used to working with governance organizations. So I'm quite looking forward to this. I wanted to just make a few notes before we start, 4 kind of forum rules, if that's okay. We recognize that ideally we would be participating in this forum in person, sitting around a room or a stage and listening to our candidates. There are limitations, of course, to Zoom, but we are going to adapt to those. The forum is being recorded. It will be posted most likely either on the Devon website, on the Calmar Library website, or potentially somewhere else as well. We have speaking limits that have been put in place for the candidates as we hear them. As the candidates kick off tonight's session, each one of them will be asked to speak for up to 3 minutes to introduce themselves. We'll then move into a question period where everybody will have 2 minutes, up to 2 minutes, to respond to a question. And then the closing session will provide each candidate again with another 3 minutes as well. You will see that there are cards, the color cards. Some of you will notice that there's a green card on your screen. That will remain green until there are 30 seconds left in your allotted speaking time. At that point, the card will turn to orange and it will tell you that there are 30 seconds left. Once you have reached no time left, it will turn to red. I'd ask you at that point to rapidly wrap up your remarks. And if not, I will interject. We have three trustee candidates with us this evening. In order of presentation, we will hear from them in a way that was determined using random.org, just to randomize the names. The first presenter, as we get to it, will be Mackenzie Woodcock. The second, Devonna Klaassen. And the third will be Ron Patrick. And we'll move back and forth through that list as we go. The questions, if you have them, members of the public who are viewing here tonight, can be directed, if you want to, at any candidate in particular or to all of our candidates. You have a Q&A feature as part of the Zoom system that we're using this evening. If you would like to put your questions into the Q&A, we have a running tally of questions. We hopefully will get to most, if not all, of the questions that you might have for our candidates this evening. We have some pre-devised questions as well, if there aren't questions from everybody else. So we'd certainly be interested to hear what you're interested in. Just a note of a caution, if we can. Tonight, we are not interested in the gotcha type question. So we will be monitoring questions just to make sure they seem equitable and relevant as we pose them to the questions. We don't tend to have any problems with respect, but I would urge you to be respectful because we do have the ability to mute participants or remove them from the system. I suppose the same would go for the candidates as well, but that's never been a problem. All right, so with that in mind, to our candidates, before we move on to to the introductory phase. The three candidates, Devonna, Ron, and Mackenzie. Do any of you have any questions before we start? If not, we'll move on to that. We have the first question. The first person who is going to introduce themselves and has 3 minutes to speak is Mackenzie Woodcock. Mr. Woodcock, if you would like to take up to 3 minutes to speak, your time starts now.
All right, thank you very much. I don't think I'll necessarily take up the full 3 minutes.
Fair enough.
I do apologize for being a little bit late and behind. I had some fun times at work and I didn't want to jeopardize the integrity of my job there. So just wanted to come here and was glad to be here as soon as I could. So I do apologize if I'm a little out of breath or a little bit not as put together as perhaps some of my other companions for tonight. But I do appreciate everyone who is able to come out, and hopefully we'll be able to answer the questions in the most appropriate way and in the way that people are looking to hear from. So thank you very much.
Okay, if that's your opening comment, we will move on if that's okay. Thank you, Mr. Woodcock. To Ms. Klaassen, you're coming up next. You have up to 3 minutes to provide your opening comments.
Good evening. As an ally born and raised on Treaty 4 land, I would like to begin by acknowledging the history and significance of this Treaty 6 land where I now live and work, as well as the many Indigenous peoples of this area. Thank you to all involved in creating this opportunity and to all of you present, investing your time in the election process. I have had the honor to serve as a Black Gold trustee for the past 4 years and am humbled by the support and respect I have been shown as a leader. From my community, from parents and staff across the division, from this board who elected me as their chair for the bulk of the term, and from trustees across the province with the Alberta School Boards Association. Over the course of this term, I have worked tirelessly to further develop the governance role, foster professional growth, and calmly lead as the board faced numerous unprecedented situations. I have also served on various provincial committees. As a trustee, my role is nonpartisan. My focus is on kids, not party politics. My party is education and my people are our students. Every decision I face at this table is approached with a lens of what's best for kids, first and foremost. And I have a vested interest in those decisions as a Black Gold parent. Education has faced many challenges in the past few years. Leadership role. Executive emergent issues have required extra time, extra emotional investment, and extra tolerance of controversy. I seriously wrestled with whether the intensity was worth it. My name is on the ballot for Black Gold Ward 2 trustee, not just in spite of this intensity, but because of it. Now is not the time to step back. There's work to be done and will be best faced if we continue momentum. We need to maintain pressure with curriculum advocacy, challenging process and timelines. We need in navigating the pandemic and address connection, well-being of students and staff. And we need to critically analyze the funding model and advocate for sustainable funding with student needs and enrollment levels. In terms of background, I hold a degree. My previous career was a crisis communication skill set has been truly invaluable as a trustee. I have proved that I am and current educational issues and trends, locally and internationally. I am committed to ongoing personal and professional growth, have made many meaningful connections, and my passion for education is equally matched by my passion for leadership. Our kids deserve the absolute very best. As your trustee, I will stand for nothing less. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Klaassen. Just a note, I don't know if it was for other people too, I noticed your video was breaking up a little bit. If that happens again, I might just ask you to turn off the camera just to save a little bit of bandwidth from time to time, but just in case. So thank you very much. Mr. Patrick, on with you. You have 3 minutes as well.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much, Ian, and I really appreciate this opportunity. So my name is Ron Patrick. I live at Wizard Lake. My wife and I are both retired teachers, in my discussions with Mackenzie, I asked him, why are you running? He said, well, I want to give back. I grew up in Devon and I want to give back. So I've really enjoyed my career as a teacher. So my answer is the same thing. I'd like to give back. This week at the lake, I heard some noise down at the landing, and I went down and there was Beaumont grade 10 outdoor ed class. And I had forgotten how much fun it was to work with these young people and to be able to have some fun with them. And so I was able to spend some time with them, and it was really enjoyable. I just say one thing. When I was a teacher, at the end of a year, some students got together and gave me a book on teaching. And in the next couple of years, I got that book 3 times. And I thought, why are you giving me this book? Either you are thanking me for being a good teacher, or you think I need to read it. The first few pages in the book are a story about a little boy, Milk, and a kitten. The little boy wants to be helpful. Milk is a perfect food for kittens, and the kitten was hungry. At the end of the story, there's spilt milk, a scratched boy, and a hungry kitten. And I thought, what's this story teach us? It teaches that sometimes there's spilt milk in spite of good intentions. And I think sometimes that's where we are in our society, and in some of the events that are going on with our curriculum, with our finances for schools, and those kinds of things. So I'm interested in joining the board and see if we can work out and make sure there's no more spilt milk. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Patrick. So with that, we've concluded the opening remarks. We now have some questions that we will pose to the candidates. Each candidate will be given the opportunity to respond to the question and can have up to 2 minutes to do so. We have some questions that we had thought of in advance, but there are also some questions starting to come in through the question and answer in Zoom as well. So I'll perhaps just start with that if I can. One of our participants or viewers has said, what background, be it volunteer, education, or work experience that you have would assist you as a school trustee? So with that in mind, Mr. Woodcock, I'll start with you.
Oh, thank you very much. If it's coming to volunteer experience, I've spent a lot of time with the youth groups here in town, whether it's the religious ones or a public youth group. And it was always focused around connecting with the youth and helping with them outside of school, being able to look throughout what's happening in school is important and it's relevant, but they also take it home with them. It affects them outside of there. There is a whole life around school and it's impactful everywhere. So I spent a lot of time interacting with them, getting to know with them personal basis and letting them be comfortable with knowing who I am. And the more questions that they felt comfortable asking me, the easier it becomes for everyone. The environment itself is healthier, it's safer. People are comfortable being able to show their differences, their uniqueness. They want to share, because it's by proving to our youth, I'd like to say that everyone deserves and earns the trust, but I think for our youth, especially right now, if they're frustrated with how things are happening in quarantine and they're not necessarily having access to these outside volunteer youth groups where people can just show them goodwill, they're always either a part of or in response to, we have to really bring into this personal aspect to it again. And so I spent a lot of my time as a youth volunteering for that stuff. And I took a little bit of schooling directly with CYC, which is Child and Youth Care. And that's working with youth who are trauma. And that's once again, entering into their personal space and being asked for permission, essentially, to be involved in them, to recognize that they do have their own independence and that they're going to tell me what it is that they want and what their issues are. But I have to be comfortable setting aside my ideas, kind of my personality, and just saying, okay, if this is what you're telling me, I'm going to take you at your word.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Klaassen, do you have a response to this question?
I do, thank you. So volunteerism for me, should I turn my camera off or is that okay?
Yeah, so far we're okay. I'll wave at you or something if we're having trouble.
Okay. Volunteerism for me is something that started at a really early age. It was instilled in me from my parents, not necessarily intentionally so, but more so it's just how we did things. I was really active in 4-H. I sat on boards at a young age. I worked planning the local horse show. We did things as a family, like participating in the local rural cemetery cleanup and that kind of thing. So it really became part of who I was. When I moved to Edmonton for university, I was attracted to the peer support program there, and I took on a volunteer role that required 60 hours of training and passing an exam just to qualify to give my time. And that experience really shaped me. I ended up changing my major from accounting and finance to psychology. I worked evenings and weekends with troubled teens, and I worked my way up to the point where I was the director of that crisis center, where I learned HR skills, budgeting skills, strategic planning, a lot of high level pieces where I reported directly to the governance board of directors. And so had that relationship from the other perspective. And so I learned a lot of applicable skill sets in that role. It really shaped a lot of who I am, not only the work, but also the content of it, running a crisis center, working and caring for mostly kids at the time. Since kids, I have chaired the Leduc and Victim Services Board, the local preschool. I'm on the committee for Devon Dolphins, and of course, my last 4 years as a trustee, most of which being board chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Klaassen. Mr. Patrick, any comments on the background question?
So I had a career of 37 years in public education. So I have a master's in Ed Min and a doctorate in educational leadership. I worked with Boy Scouts of Canada for 40 years. In the early years, they recruited me to be a professional scouter. I went to Ottawa to Scout headquarters and had their training there. Recently, I've been involved. I took a run at the school trustee position 4 years ago. Was not successful. Some people said, well, if I'd have known you, I'd have voted for you. So I thought, well, I better get busy. So in the last 4 years, I've been on the chairman of the Park and Recs, Leduc County Parks and Rec Board, the Glen Park Hall Board. I'm a fire guardian. I'm on the subdivision and appeal board for the county. And so I've gotten to know some people that way. So I try to be active and be involved in the community. So I have lots of experience in education as well as in community service.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick. We have the next question coming up. We're going to go in reverse order. So in this case, we'll go Mr. Patrick first, then Mr. Woodcock, and Ms. Klaassen will go third. The question comes in from one of our participants this evening. What are the top 3 priorities for each candidate? And I'll go first, if we can, to Mr. Patrick. Top 3 priorities.
So I think the first priority is we're still coping with COVID. And COVID has really impacted our students, not only education, but socially, emotionally, mental health. Our teachers are having a difficult time. I just read an article yesterday that COVID occupies our brains most of the time. I was with my son yesterday picking up a mattress, and 3/4 of the time we talked about COVID. So so COVID's a high priority. We have to deal with the mandates, with the masking, with making sure schools are safe and that students are happy and that we're able to provide education in a safe way. So that's really got to be number 1. Number 2 has been mentioned, and that has to do with finances. We've got to make sure that our provincial government provides the kind of funding that we need to support our teachers. The other thing the curriculum obviously is something that's being discussed, that needs to be sorted. But I think for me, I became a principal of a small school, rural school, when I began teaching. And I'm interested in making sure that our small rural schools get the support that they need, that they can continue to function and provide that kind of community support that's so important for our young people.
Thanks, Mr. Patrick. Ms. Klaassen, comment on 3 top priorities.
Yeah, I definitely have at least 3 top priorities. COVID for sure is a big one. Navigating the academics, mental health, social emotional needs during and post-pandemic are critical. We need to ensure that we're keeping our schools as safe as possible so that we can keep the learning there. But we also have to be actively prepared for our post-COVID scenarios where we can focus on wellness and addressing the literacy and numeracy gaps that research is showing we're seeing across the board. Curriculum is a huge one for me. I was in a 6-hour meeting today just on curriculum. We need a transparent process. We need a world-class curriculum to meet the levels that we have right now and then some. And there are some issues that need to be addressed in terms of timelines, in terms of process, in terms of implementation, in terms of staffing, in terms of resources. There's a lot that needs to be addressed when it comes to curriculum. And we can't take the pressure off that. Our kids deserve the very best in that regard. Funding, you know, the new funding model has its perks. It's definitely predictable. The sustainability is, you know, the jury's still out on that. And in terms of meeting the funding levels, it's not set up ideally for boards that are growing, and Black Gold is a growing board. And we need to make sure that we are getting funding that is actually addressing the number of students we have in our school division at the time and are prepared to face that continual growth. And with that whole process, as my background of being chair of the board, I really feel that part of my role is not just the educational issues, but is also the goal of supporting the development of the new trustees that come into the board and using my leadership to help get them up to speed so that we can really tackle these problems together.
Thank you. Mr. Woodcock, a comment on the top 3 priorities.
Well, first and foremost, COVID. It's been around on everyone's mind, as is very much, thankfully, it's on all 3 of our minds here. I think realistically, it might be something that's sticking around for quite a while. So I would like to be able to start making steps towards at least approaching a hybrid model for our schooling. That's, you know, it would be nice that if it goes away forever and we can continue as schooling was, but I don't think we're going to have that, unfortunately. So I think this is an excellent time to begin trying something new, whether that's a hybrid system where we have, you know, we choose the essential classes to be keeping in schools and doing the online learning that may be available for some kids, or allowing them kind of the personal choice towards having an online focus with additional in-person classes. Not entirely sure how that works, but that would be my hope. After that, I would very much like to restore some more open communication with the communities. Having a board who excels and knows exactly what is happening is excellent, but if a community doesn't necessarily know what they can do themselves to help, we might be losing out on some potential, I like to say activities, but we're losing out some potential responses if we're not looking inside our own communities to see what can be offered that way. So that way we can hopefully, in the worst case of budgets not necessarily going how we like, or if there isn't a new curriculum right away, we can begin looking at how to introduce our own methods, whether it's live learning or just recognizing the historical growths in the communities around our own community. And third and foremost, I would like people to feel comfortable talking with the board directly and knowing who their representative is and what that actually means and how they can take part in it. So that way it becomes a two-way street between full recognition and understanding. So it's not just the board knowing and telling, but community understanding what's been chosen.
Thank you very much. Next round of questions, or next question then, will be is a bit of a blend. There are a couple of questions that are similar. I kind of combined them together and last it as one. We're going to reverse the order again. Mr. Woodcock, you're going to go first this time, then Ms. Klaassen and Mr. Patrick. So there was a question that came up in the chat. It said, will you represent your community before your region? The way I wanted to phrase this, and you can take it as you want. Ward 2 is a blend of urban communities and rural people. How do you balance the needs of both groups? Mr. Woodcock, I'll start with you.
Yeah. I think to balance the needs, first and foremost, I'm going to have to spend the time to understand what the community is needing, because it is unique and it is incredibly different between the two. And even just from going door to door, what I'm hearing the concerns in Calmar is extraordinarily different than what I'm hearing here in Devon. So I'm thinking it's going to take time to actually understand what it is they feel is necessary and what are some of the, I don't want to say acknowledgement points because that's not correct, but being able to figure out where we can kind of concede priority to between each other. As we're now having to share the singular resource in the same voice, it's going to be absolutely vital to actually understand what the key issues are. And if there's any smaller issues that aren't necessarily first and foremost that we can help each other with. I'm not entirely sure yet what would be required to be able to get those, but that comes with being able to understand what the actual problems are and how they interact together. So there will have to be some time of actual open debates and even just open recognition of saying, all right, where are you guys at? Because this is where we're at. These are the things that we need. Do you guys feel comfortable with this? Because there's no clean way to blend them. At the base level, it is two different communities who have two different needs. And now we're going to have to really try and figure out what can we do. It's no longer even figuring out where the limitations are if we don't even know what we want to do or where the first step is. So I think that's, yeah, I don't feel entirely comfortable with the situation as it is, but I think that we'll be able to we should be spending the time to start figuring out where the middle ground is, if there even is one.
Thank you very much. Ms. Klaassen, any comment on that question?
For sure. Yeah, so an interesting thing about school trustee elections, I'm going to use the town of Devon as an example. In the municipal election, there's 17 people running for councillor positions. And when the 6 are chosen from those 17 candidates, those 6 people will represent the town of Devon because that is the entire boundary. Blackgold chose to go the ward route for setting up structure so that there was a physical body representing the separate geographical areas of the division. However, once we are elected as trustees, we represent the entire division. We represent Blackgold. So as the trustee for Ward 2, representing Calmar, Devon, and area, my role would be to gather insights and be that liaison between the community, hearing what the community needs are, hearing what those local needs are, and filtering that through to the bigger picture where we're making decisions for the entire division. So it's not about one region or one community in a region over the other. It's about everybody. It's about the whole division. And in terms of the rural piece, absolutely. Part of the reason we set up the ward structure the way it is to make sure that we still had rural voices, rural representation on the board. If we had gone the route of having vote in 7 trustees that serve the entire Blackgold area and you just had to be within the boundaries anywhere, it's fairly likely that we would end up with trustee representation predominantly from our urban areas. And we felt it was really important to maintain those rural voices. So that's why the structure is set up the way that it is, so that we can be that back and forth liaison and provide that support rurally as well.
Thanks very much. Mr. Patrick, any comment on the rural and urban?
Yes, so we have constituents in the rural areas and urban areas. One of the things I wanted to get at with my little story of the little boy and the milk and the spilt milk is here's this little boy who is well-intentioned, grabs this little cat and sticks his face in the milk, and there's a disaster. And so part of the problem is when we start thinking about competing for scarce resources. So what that means is, if we provide a program for a rural school, is that taking away resources, money from urban center? And the reverse, is that going to happen? Well, I think we can, the trustee's role is to, one of the wonderful things that come out of the residential schools is this great little logo, every child matters. And so every child does matter. So a child that's going to school in Leduc deserves as good an education as a student that's out in New Sarepta. They both need a good education. But here's the problem, and let me just explain this quickly. If I'm in a small rural school and I've got a split grade, and because of the resources, I've got 36 students in that class, and what can I do to help that situation? So here's for an example. In Southern Alberta, there were 2 rural schools that were facing closure. So school board came up with an idea and said, listen, how about we bus the kids from one of the small schools so that we have a K-3 and then a 4-6.
Mr. Patrick, I need you to wrap this up. We've run out of time.
Okay, and so they did that, and they solved it. They could keep the schools, and they met the needs of the students.
Thank you very much. Next question we have, I should mention too, to Mr. Patrick, I am a graduate of New Sarepta High School. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so I know of what you speak. The next question we will go with Mr. Woodcock, Ms. Klaassen, and Mr. Patrick. It's a question that may not take the full 2 minutes, and if not, we can get on with other ones as well. Question from one of the participants. Do you have any pecuniary interest that would prevent you from being on any committee or voting on any questions that may arise? For anybody who doesn't know, pecuniary interest is a conflict of interest that has to do with money, beneficial to the individual. So, Mr. Woodcock, do you have any comments on that, pecuniary interest?
No, I don't.
Very much.
Pretty easy.
It's so sick. Ms. Klaassen, any comment from you?
Yep, absolutely. Yes, I do have pecuniary interest. I am, in fact, married to a principal in Black Gold. But here's the deal on this. There is absolutely no restrictions to being a trustee if you have pecuniary interest. In fact, it is so common across the province that it's written into the Education Act to create some boundaries around it. In fact, more than 50% of the boards across the province do have trustees with pecuniary interest. Some of them have all of their trustees with pecuniary interest. What it requires me to do is step away from any decision that directly impacts my household income. So essentially that's teacher salary. Teacher salary is determined at the provincial level, not at the board level. The only decision I really have to leave the room for is a decision based on what we're going to, if we're going to make any adjustments to teacher benefits. So over the last 4 years, I've had to step out of the room a handful of times, perhaps. Yeah, they strategically avoid a certain number of committees, but guess what? There's so much work to go around that I've just had so many more opportunities. I can honestly say that I've served on just as many or more committees than every trustee on the board, and it has really not limited my role in any way whatsoever. As well, having someone in my family who is deeply invested in education as I am actually benefits, as it brings a lot of discussion and a lot of passion into our conversations and into our household. So I assure you, it's not a problem.
Thanks, Ms. Klaassen. Any comment on pecuniary interest, Mr. Patrick?
I have a son who is a teacher in Beaumont, Danzero.
Okay, thank you very much, all of you. Our next question, we'll start with Mr. Patrick this time, go to Ms. Klaassen, then Mr. Woodcock. This one is directed specifically as Ms. Klaassen, but I will give the other two an opportunity to respond if there's anything they want to respond to. To Devonna, what did you achieve during your last term that made an impact on our community, and how was the community impacted by that? Well, actually, we'll start with you because this was directed to you, Ms. Klaassen, if that's okay. And then we'll go on to Mr. Patrick.
Okay, so accomplishments over the course of the term.
What did you achieve during your last term that made an impact on the community, and how was the community impacted?
Okay, so accomplishments or specific accomplishments attributed to a person, again, when you're 1 vote out of 7, can be a little bit tricky to establish. However, I can say that some trustees put in a little more effort in terms of research, advocacy, and communication than others. I've been told that one of my greatest strengths is also one of my biggest downfalls. And that is that I will put the effort in and put the work in until the job is done and done to the best of my ability. And this means a lot of late nights and early mornings doing my best to thoughtfully share my insights and advocate for our communities and students in Black Gold. So my greatest contribution to this board is leadership. What I have done to bring this board to a new level. We have changed how we approach a lot of our meetings, digging into a lot meatier topics, having deeper generative discussion. It's increased the knowledge and understanding, and created safe environments that have allowed us to have more meaningful debate, which has allowed us to really dig into some really big tasks and tackle some really big things. One of the things that I championed this year was the process of how we moved forward with our strategic planning process and how we reaffirmed our core values. And that was a process that was done primarily through our school council meetings and through community engagements in the community, as well as with all of our staff. The feedback, the engagement, the involvement in that process was absolutely incredible. And we have come out of it with core values that are solid to represent the culture of Black Gold. As well as definitions that really hold on to them. And those came from the community engagement that we set up. Additionally, I would speak to communication. We have a quarterly newsletter, we have a social media presence. All of these are things that can grow, but I had a strong influence in moving them forward, creating those community connections, and I look forward to developing that further.
Thank you very much. Mr. Patrick, you're welcome to comment on this if you want. If not, we'll just move on to a different question.
Yes, I'd like to comment that New Humble School was closed. That impacted me. It's where my neighbor kids go. My grandkids attended there. It's the oldest school in Alberta, founded in 1900. It's 120 years old, and it was closed. And as a result, my neighbors and friends had to apply and become a charter school. And they opened with an enrollment of over 90 students in September of this year.
Thanks. Actually, I guess to another question that had come in too, and I hadn't understand what NHSC is, but I imagine it's New Humble. Can you explain what might have been done differently to keep the school in district? That's your comment on that. Mr. Woodcock, do you want to comment on the question that was directed to Ms. Klaassen at all?
Unfortunately, I wasn't here during the time, so no, I do not have any comment.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. More general question here. How will the school division be different in 4 years because you are on the board? And we'll go to you, Mr. Woodcock, to start that, Ms. Klaassen, and then Mr. Patrick.
At the very least, I would hope that people would feel confident in being able to contact the board directly themselves to be able to know what it is that's happening, and perhaps feel a little bit less frustrated when trying to understand the context behind some of the board decisions, and whether that's just preemptive planning and more open availability for people to be reaching out to. Outside of that, I don't really think I can, I can't really guess how it would be, because this could potentially be a fantastic year of growth throughout it. If I'm in and I end up having a nice survey with all of our students under our district, we may have an entirely different look upon education afterwards. The youth may speak and they may have some wonderful ideas that I could never think of. So I'm not going to necessarily put any goalposts to limit where we may go or direct the growth of our school and education. I just hope that we're all proud of where we end up.
Thank you very much. Ms. Klaassen, any comments on that question about different in 4 years?
For sure. Yeah, one of the things that I feel really strongly about in any board that I've ever been on is that each term of any board, the goal is, maybe not the goal, but an aspect of it is that that board will be stronger than the previous term of that board and will set the stage for the next board to be even stronger. That's something that I feel really passionate about. Governance is truly at the core of what we do as trustees. We need to see that big picture in the overarching view and serve as that direct link between parents and families in the school division in order to support the kids. I've had so many amazing conversations, and I talk to people across the division daily who reach out by email or phone to me. As a returning leader, a huge priority for me will be on building that team. We know we're going to have a minimum of 3 new people on the team. We need to learn about one another and really connect. We need to spend time together with a targeted focus on our strategic priorities so that we have common goals. And we need to spend some time reconnecting in our communities. Our ward boundaries are changing. We've got some new relationships to build. Hopefully, as things wind up with COVID, when things wind up with COVID, we can move forward with some of the goals that we've sort of been holding off on in terms of some of the face-to-face engagement ideas that we have, some of those in-person pieces, as well as I have this vision of strengthening our schools as hubs in communities. And so really working with our communities and our community organizations to strengthen that and really make them foundational hubs in our communities.
Thanks very much. Mr. Patrick, do you have a comment on the 4 years from now?
Well, I'm interested in student achievement. I'm hoping that we'll be able to see the curriculum issues sorted out, that those curriculum issues will get worked out. I know there's provision in the new budget and financing of schools for small rural schools so that student achievement can be recognized, so that I hope that our students will be able to get back the kind of status that we've had in the past, particularly in math and science. One of the things that I think is important, sometimes in organizations, one of the best things a trustee could maybe do is to get out of the way and let our professional administrators call on them for their direction and leadership. And yeah, so sometimes there's an opportunity I think sometimes you can over-govern. So I think one of the things is to balance the governance with administration and to be able to create a larger team and then bring about that community effort where we're all working together.
Thank you very much. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. We'll start with one and see what we get to with this. There was a question that had come in on the curriculum, a little bit more broadly, perhaps just the question that had come in. What are your opinions on the current draft curriculum developed by the Alberta government and the timelines for it to be implemented? We're going to start with you, Mr. Patrick, go to Ms. Klaassen and Mr. Woodcock on the curriculum.
So unfortunately, I think that the curriculum has become a political football. I at one point in my career wrote curriculum for Alberta education, and the approach that we used back then really was to take 1 or 2 curriculums and work on those per year, have the stakeholder groups give some input, pilot those curriculums, make them aware publicly, publishers would be involved, and we'd have a curriculum that people were happy with. I think this current plan to fix all curriculums all at once has just been a nightmare. And so I think, I'm not sure. Right now, the province has invited stakeholder groups to give their input. We'll see what happens. But I think we might need to take a step back in order to go too forward.
Thank you. Ms. Klaassen, a comment on the curriculum and its implementation.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I spent my entire day today in a curriculum advocacy meeting. I'm not sure how much people realize that how unbelievably good our education system here in Alberta is. It's unequivocally world class. And as both a parent and a trustee, this proposed draft curriculum leaves me feeling a bit gutted. Are we due for a bit of a rewrite? Absolutely. But hands down, all of our kids deserve that rewrite to take our current world-class curriculum to the next level, not to be backpedaling. We need to set our kids up for success and give them the tools they need to adequately address their future. I am disappointed by the content, the errors, how it lacks in reflecting diversity, the sheer volume of content to memorize. Even more so, I'm disappointed with the process, the minimal input and feedback from current and active curriculum experts. The content needs more teacher expertise and best practice from brain development research and less antiquated opinions. The lack of preparation of resources and actual process for implementation. There's no plan for bridging curriculums, for example. The lack of acknowledgement of the blanket concern from professors, teachers, school boards, parents. The lack of diverse representation. Our Indigenous education pieces are really lacking. The Francophone representation, lacking. I'm also deeply concerned that the timelines for this curriculum seem to be based on a political agenda rather than on what's best for kids. Beyond the fact that this is all in complete disregard for the fact that teachers have spent the last 2 years navigating how to provide meaningful education in the midst of a pandemic. Once we're through this hurdle, addressing the learning gaps, mental health, social emotional development, those are going to need to be our priorities. And forcing a new curriculum in the midst of all of this is not respectful to teachers or to students.
Thank you very much. Mr. Woodcock, a comment on curriculum and implementation.
I like to think that this was their best attempt to meet some of the demands that was put upon them, but it definitely looks like it was the idea of saying the token gesture of look, we are teaching these things, we are at least touching upon them, but it's definitely taught and presented amongst the actual years, so that way kids who are learning them can learn it more as a trivia fact that they retain until the end of the year, and at that point they can forget about it. And if it is to be built upon in later years, it'll just be retaught at the starting of the year, slightly touched along, just long enough to say that yes, we did teach them this, yes, we are touching upon it, but we're not expecting them to actually be impactful. There's no outer experience for our youth to actually be able to tie any of the terminology that they're learning for it. So it is a little frustrating at the very least. I think it's also been an excellent guidepost of figuring out what it is we actually want to see, which is we want real people who've actually experienced this history in the classrooms talking about what it meant for them, what it meant for their families. And unfortunately, especially with our Indigenous group, it's still real to them. It's still within one generation in some cases of our choices of our history actively affecting them. So it's kind of obnoxious that we're not just asking them to come in and say, hey, can you at least come speak, even with the curriculum that we have now, can you come give context to this? So I'm excited for when we actually have a new curriculum that's met up with everyone. And it's, I would say, more in line with the values that we hold as Canadians, or at least the ones that we say we hold. But until then, I'm at least happy that we are taking steps and people are feeling renewed. Like there's a renewal of energy towards figuring out what a good education is. How do we take it beyond just trivia knowledge into expanding a full youth to treat them as the young adults that we say that they are?
Thank you very much. Our last question before we get into kind of your final closing remarks then is a question about the role of the board. Can you, and we'll start with you, Mr. Woodcock, then Ms. Klaassen and Mr. Patrick. Can you speak to the difference as you understand it between the role of the school board and the role of the superintendent? Mr. Woodcock, any comments on that?
This has been a tough one for me, I'll admit. It's been a real, because I've had some people saying, and when I bring up with ideas, they'll tell me that no, you'll have to actually get permission with the school intendant for it. So to my understanding, it is the superintendent is there to speak as to what they can and cannot do, but we're there to provide a guideline for them to inform their decision of what they want to actually do in their schools, as well as kind of working as the main interaction point for us. When we have an idea, if we would like to implement something or test something, then we have to talk to the superintendent to get approval or permission in a way to actually go into a school and interact with the school. To the best of my knowledge, at least.
Thank you very much. Ms. Klaassen, a comment on school board and superintendent.
Yeah, school board and superintendent, that is a really, really important relationship. So the school board actually hires, oversees, and evaluates and signs the contract of the superintendent. The one and only employee of the school board is the superintendent. The school board is responsible for all of the governance and all of, we approve the budget, we oversee the strategic plan, we do all of the high level planning and programming for the division, but the operational aspect of things, we delegate the power of that to the superintendent to manage his staff or her staff and oversee the operations and the actual integration of those plans into the schools and into the school system. You often view there being a staircase between where the board sits up on the balcony of that 30,000 feet view, really high balcony, and the superintendent has a staircase. And the board and the superintendent go up and down that staircase communicating with each other, but for the board to interact below, that superintendent is the buffer. One of the things that we find really valuable in Black Gold, we often talk about our Black Gold family. The board and the superintendent have a really strong relationship, and we work really hard to define exactly which things are our role. We have a lot of conversations, the superintendent and myself as board chair, when things come to the table of, is this governance? Is it operational? Is it gray? Why? How do we manage that? And, you know, we've kept our staircase fairly short. We have a really good trust and a really good relationship, but we very actively maintain that staircase to make sure we're each in our own sandbox.
Thank you very much. Mr. Patrick, a comment on superintendent and the board roles.
Yes. So back in the day, many years ago, parents got together and said, hey, I've been teaching my kids around the candlelight in my house. How about we get together and we hire a teacher and we build a little 4x4 schoolhouse out on the prairies? And so the first schools were formed. The parents were the school board. The one-room teacher was the teacher. And then as that is developed, the parents really are the ones that are in the driver's seat of how our school operation works. Somehow, somewhere along the line, we've forgotten that. Of course, the superintendent exists at the good pleasure of the school board. But parents really have to be able to be connected to their trustees so that those trustees can give direction and help the superintendent provide the kind of education that the parents want. So it's a three-tiered system: parents, trustees, and the superintendent.
Thank you very much, all of you. And thank you for your responses as we went through several questions, which of course you didn't know about in advance. So thank you very much for that. Just before we wrap up for the evening, we have the invitation to our three candidates to provide some closing comments. And we have a couple of minutes for each candidate if they want it. They don't have to use all of it if they don't want to. With this, we'll go in the reverse order of our opening comments, which means Mr. Patrick, you go first in this, then Ms. Klaassen, and we'll wrap up with Mr. Woodcock. So Mr. Patrick, you have up to 2 minutes for closing comments.
Well, it's been a real interesting experience, this forum. I wasn't sure what to expect. The other day, I wanted to come and visit my grandkids in Beaumont, and Shani said, well, they're at the climbing school. I said, what? So right over here at Beaumont, my two little 5-year-old twins and their older brother, the three of them, were on the climbing wall. And I said, can I come watch? Nothing's more natural for little boys than to climb. And here they are on rappel, and they're learning and engaged. I really like what Mackenzie said of bringing education right into the hands of so that these young people have real experiences. And these little boys, it was awesome to watch them, to see the passion, the excitement of them learning and gaining new skills. So I hope to be part of that, as to represent parents, to go to our superintendent, to encourage our teachers to provide the very best education that our young people can have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick. Ms. Klaassen, final comments to you?
In the last election, 5 out of the 7 Black Gold trustees were new. Reflecting on this as a team, the common feedback was that at least the entire first year was constant learning. No matter what background you come into this with, there is so much to learn. This election, Black Gold is guaranteed to have a minimum of 3 new trustees who will be embarking on that steep learning curve. I look forward to fresh perspectives. This is beneficial to any board, as is stability, continuity, and experience. Because of my leadership strengths and active experience, I have the capacity to support and empower this board to continue moving forward and be there to provide stability and support for the new trustees to help them get their bearings. In this term, I've been a strong advocate of mental health and wellness, community engagement and communication, and have directly influenced and contributed to positive growth in these areas. As a trustee, I believe in serving our Black Gold families. Being a parent myself, I recognize the importance and value of the parent voice. This input is essential for trustee decision-making. I listen carefully at school council meetings and actively request input. I also attend a number of other meetings in the community simply to listen and gather insight and perspective. I believe in collaboration with school communities, staff, other boards, community organizations, and all levels of government. I see schools as community hubs and see opportunities for strengthening this role through partnerships with our municipalities. I believe advocacy work is best done when it is clear and continuous, and most especially when strong relationships are established. I believe communication is critical. In my role as chair, I am the spokesman for the board and am comfortable and confident to do so effectively. When it comes to communication, I feel strongly that the how and why decisions are made or actions are taken are just as important to communicate as the what. Whether you're connected to the schools in any way or not, the children in our communities count on all of us. We are experiencing a time where there's a lot of instability, change, and unknowns. I offer continuity and experienced leadership that are critical for strong advocacy and governance in education. I am self-motivated, hardworking, strategic, forward-thinking, and eager to continue to serve as your voice to strengthen our education system and inspire success for today and for the future. You can learn more about me and what I stand for at votedevonna.ca. When you vote, I ask you support continued strong leadership for the children in our communities. Vote for your public school trustee. Vote for Devonna Klaassen. A vote for Devonna Klaassen is a vote for your voice, our children, their future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Klaassen. Final comment goes to Mr. Woodcock, if you would like to take any of that time.
I will. Well, thank you very much, Ian, for spending your time to moderate for us. It was well done. And as well as thank you to my other companions. It was very informative hearing from the questions that were put forward, and it helped myself in my own understanding. And as well, thank you everyone who decided to come out and put forward some of these questions. I enjoyed them thoroughly. And if you'd like to vote, last voting day is October 18th. And thank you for your time.
Short and sweet. Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our forum for this evening. I would like to close the forum with thanking the candidates, all 3 of you, for putting your names forward for consideration as the local candidate for the school trustee position. I'd also like to thank the Robina Baker School Council and the Calmar Public Library as sponsors of tonight's event. I would direct anybody who's watching and interested to the Black Gold School Division website for candidate profiles and contact information on the people we've heard from this evening. I will note that the advance vote is already underway. And I would suggest to people that you look at the town of Calmar, the town of Devon, and Leduc County websites for voting information and for voting times. And as more than one of our candidates has suggested, the actual election day itself is on October the 18th. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would call this forum closed. Wish you a good evening and enjoy the rest of the campaign and the rest of your night. Thank you very much for participating, everybody.